Today, in the second installment of our look at the newly rising multipolar world, we speak with geopolitical analyst Mark Sleboda. Mark is a retired U.S. Navy nuclear specialist who lives in Moscow and lectures at Moscow State University in international relations and Eurasian studies. We discussed three interesting bits of recent news regarding U.S. engagement with the newly rising multipolar world. Mark, welcome. I want to talk about two things. One, this article that was in Foreign Affairs last week. Is it Foreign Affairs or Foreign Policy?
Foreign Affairs.
Yeah. And it deals with multipolarity in a way that was really unexpected for me. First of all, acknowledging it as something other than a delusion of I don't know what, the right wing. I think they accuse people, actually. And the other was Professor Mearsheimer's, I guess maybe a refinement or an elaboration of his theory of the geopolitical universe that says, in essence, forget about Russia as the great danger. The great danger is China, and we got to get on this stick right away. You want to, plumb some of this stuff and lay it out for us?
Sure, yeah. Okay, so the paper you were referencing in Foreign Affairs that I think is worth reading, it's How to Build a Better Order, Limiting Great Power Rivalry in an Anarchic World. And it's by Stephen Walt and Danny Roderick. And for those who don't know, Stephen Walt is he's been head of political science at Harvard's Kennedy School of Government. And he's one of the most prominent realist political scientists in the United States today. He's right up there, top tier. He's got a number of very good books criticizing American aggressive hegemony around the world and how it is ultimately self-destructive.
So he may not be the prevailing thinking of the elite here, but he's a part of the elite, and he's the internal critic, the loyal opposition type, yes. Which means they're noticing some of this stuff and they're trying to find a solution to the problem.
Yeah, he's long argued, as many have, that realists, while maybe dominant during the Cold War, have been locked out of the halls of power and foreign policy in bipartisan U.S. governments for the last few decades, as the U.S. pursued a policy of global hegemony and primacy. And realists have long talked about this overweening hubris and stretching the U.S. out too far. That this liberal pursuit of hegemony was counterproductive. But this is the first time the realists have really, and such an important realist thinker, have right out in Foreign Affairs laid it out. We would be better off in a multipolar world, and we think this is how we can get there. Now, I think his argument is somewhat utopian because it simply involves people in the U.S. government deciding the U.S. to give up the pursuit of power and military primacy around the world, and I don't ever see that happening. Yeah. But I mean, it's his arguments for why a multipolar world would be a better, maybe not stable, but more stable, and a world are worth reading. So that's a decent piece. With Mearsheimer, you're talking.
Hang on one sec before you get to Mearsheimer. Yeah. So, I mean, we're talking. Tell me, maybe I'm wrong, but it seems to me what we're talking about, in essence, is not let's surrender some power in our abandoning the pursuit of hegemony, but rather the safest way or the most effective way to maintain our power is to recognize the reality of this multipolar situation that evolved. Is that about what you see?
Yeah. I mean, he discusses the long standing shift of global capital and power to the Pacific, to Asia, through the way that the global financial and economic infrastructure directed it, basically, movement in search of cheaper labor to exploit and the like. And it discusses that this era of hyper-globalization is coming to an end, because the U.S. has realized that ultimately the institutions and the neoliberal global market that they set in motion decades ago is now not working for them, and it's working to build up China, and the U.S. economic strength and military strength follows economic strength is waning. But rather than try to maintain that moment at the costly expenditure of resources, economics, and international relations, the argument is simply that the U.S. should step back and say that a multipolar world with China and India and Russia and other countries having a seat at the table is preferable from a U.S. Interests perspective than a decade of great power war that the U.S. may not be able to win.
Yeah, which we seem to be engaged in. So let's go to what Professor Mearsheimer's perspective on this.
Yeah. So John Mearsheimer, the greatest living realist IR scholar, right? I mean, everyone has to read Mearsheimer and International Relations Theory 101, and he's worth reading. And he is what is called an offensive realist, although he's been more defensive than offensive, I think, in the last few years. But he has been a total critic of U.S. foreign policy with Russia and Ukraine, about the expansion of NATO, about this proxy war on Russia through a Ukrainian government that was that seized power with U.S. help in 2014. At the same time, he was defending recently on Twitter, through proxies, because he's not actually on Twitter, but he was actually responding to astute Twitter comments about why he supports he criticizes U.S. foreign policy with Ukraine, but supports U.S. policy of provoking conflict with China over Taiwan. And his argument is basically that Russia does not present a counter-hegemonic threat to the United States, that Europe can handle Russia on its own and would be better off engaging with them and bringing Russia into a common security architecture. Whereas China is a threat that could and probably will conceivably out economy and outpower the U.S. in a short period of time, and therefore presents a threat and should be actively engaged now while there is a brief window to do so. But that window may be about to be closing. Yeah. And that, I think that's the last thing I wanted to talk about today, because there's a new U.S. Defense Department report out, a Pentagon report. And this is it's quietly issued on November 29th. Defense Department's military and security developments involving the People's Republic of China. A grimly realist rethinking of China's military capacity, and it basically says, that moment that we see where the U.S. can no longer defeat China off of its own coast, in its own backyard in the Taiwan Strait, it's here. It's already here. We can't win anymore. It's got people in Washington, in the Pentagon, panicking. Elbridge Colby, a former Pentagon official and China hawk, he was a close advisor to the Trump admin, one of the more serious ones, and he said senior flag officers are saying we're on a trajectory to get crushed in a war with China, which would likely be the most important war since World War II. And the article, there's an article about it in the Asia Times. Pentagon Chinese analysts agree U.S. can't win in Taiwan Strait. And it goes on to reference another Army War College report, basically that dovetail together. So the U.S. can no longer win in a war to defend Taiwan in the case of a forcible reunification. And so what is the answer to that? A new scorched earth policy for Taiwan. particularly with regarding to the semiconductor manufacturing industry,
which they lead the world in.
Is now regarded as a chokehold, even more so than oil on U.S. global power. Right. And basically, they want to mine the Taiwanese semiconductor manufacturings with explosives and threaten to blow them up and evacuate all the scientists to the U.S. in the case of a Chinese movement on Taiwan. And this is like crazy stuff.
Well, can you imagine working in a factory? Imagine working in a factory that's surrounded by explosives and counting on the fact that some knucklehead's not going to throw a cigarette out the window or something.
Yeah, I mean, there's no indication at all that the Taiwanese people are actually on board with this.
Of course not.
And it is important because Taiwan produces 55% of all the semiconductor chips in the world, and 80% of the high-end ones.
That's right, the most advanced stuff. That's right. So, Mark, appreciate your time. Tell us how we can look at your videos issued.
Yeah, you can follow me on Twitter at Mark Sleboda1, on Telegram, and on YouTube. I've got a nascent YouTube channel with vids there, The Real Politic with Mark Sleboda.
Thank you for your time. Speak with you again.
Great. Thanks for having me, Don.
For KPFK, I'm Don DeBar.